Rain pounded the pavement outside the Lucchese Syndicate's underground poker room, washing away the blood of 3 men. When the undisputed king of New York's underworld stepped into the alley, his gun still smoking, he froze. Looking at the shivering girl in the shadows, he whispered a deadly secret. New York City in February is completely merciless. It doesn't just freeze your bones, it freezes your hope. For 22-year-old Harper Hayes, the biting wind off the East River was just another enemy in a long line of them. She was huddled in the doorway of an abandoned tailor shop on Mulberry Street, her thin denim jacket offering practically zero protection against the sleet. Harper wasn't a romantic tragedy. She was a survivor. She knew the rhythms of Little Italy and Chinatown better than the beat cops did. She knew which bakeries threw out the fresh bread at closing time, and she knew which suited men with heavy Brooklyn accents carried rolls of cash thick enough to choke a horse. Tonight, she was starving, and desperation makes you bold. Across the street, the heavy oak doors of Il Cortile, a notoriously exclusive restaurant known to be neutral ground for the commission, swung open. A blast of warm air and the smell of garlic and expensive cigars spilled out into the freezing night. Out stepped a man who commanded the very air around him. He wasn't overly large, but the absolute stillness of his posture screamed violence. He wore a tailored charcoal overcoat, a silk scarf, and leather gloves. This was Dominic Moretti. If the whispers on the streets were true, Dominic had recently seized control of the remnants of the old Gambino and Genovese rackets, consolidating power with a brutality that made the old-school dons look like choir boys. Harper didn't care about Mafia politics. She cared about the gold money clip she saw flash as he handed a $100 bill to the valet. She timed her approach perfectly. As the valet jogged away to retrieve the car, Harper stumbled out of the shadows, colliding hard with Dominic's broad chest. She let out a practiced gasp, playing the clumsy, freezing vagrant, her nimble fingers instantly sliding toward the interior pocket of his overcoat. But she never even touched the fabric. Before she could blink, a hand clamped around her wrist with the crushing force of a steel vise. Dominic didn't even look down at her. His eyes were fixed on the street corner. "Get down," he ordered. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a low, terrifying rumble. Harper opened her mouth to curse him, but the world suddenly exploded. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire shattered the quiet street. The windows of Il Cortile blew out in a shower of screaming glass. A black SUV had rolled up to the curb, its tinted windows rolled down, spitting fire from the barrels of 2 MAC-10 submachine guns. Dominic moved with terrifying speed. He yanked Harper downward, throwing his own body weight over hers, forcing her into the slush and freezing mud behind a heavy stone planter. Bullets chipped away at the concrete inches from her head, raining dust and debris into her hair. Harper squeezed her eyes shut, a scream trapped in her throat, her hands covering her ears against the concussive noise. She heard Dominic draw a weapon, a heavy, matte black Sig Sauer. He didn't panic. He leaned around the planter and fired 3 measured, deafening shots. The automatic fire from the SUV abruptly ceased. Tires squealed against the wet asphalt as the vehicle peeled away, speeding off into the Manhattan night, leaving a chaotic symphony of car alarms and screaming pedestrians in its wake. Silence slowly crept back into the alley, save for the patter of the sleet. Harper was hyperventilating, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She tried to scramble backward, desperate to disappear into the shadows, but Dominic's hand caught her jacket. He pulled her up roughly, his eyes scanning her for bullet holes. Finding none, he finally looked at her face. The street lamp above flickered, casting a harsh, yellow pool of light over Harper's dirt-streaked cheeks, her wide, terrified green eyes, and the messy tangle of her auburn hair. Dominic froze. the gun in his hand lowered slowly. The cold, calculating mask of the Mafia boss completely shattered, replaced by a look of absolute, raw devastation. He stared at her, as if a ghost had just crawled out of the pavement. All the air seemed to leave his lungs. He reached out, his leather-gloved hand trembling just a fraction of an inch, and gently brushed a wet strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was completely incongruous with the slaughter that had just occurred. "Katerina," he breathed, his voice breaking. Harper shoved his hand away, her street instincts kicking back in. "Don't touch me! I'm not Katerina, I'm leaving!" She turned to run, but two massive men in dark suits materialized from the restaurant, their weapons drawn. "Boss, you hit?" one of them yelled. "No, Victor," Dominic said, his eyes never leaving Harper's face. His voice hardened, the vulnerability vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. He pointed at Harper. "Put her in the car." "What? No!" Harper screamed, thrashing as Victor grabbed her by the arms. "Let me go! I didn't see anything, I swear to God!" "You're not going back on the street," Dominic said, stepping closer. His gaze was intense, burning with a strange, possessive fire that terrified her far more than the bullets had. "You look just like someone I lost, and I don't lose things twice." Before Harper could scream again, Victor pressed a damp cloth over her mouth. The pungent, sickeningly sweet smell of chloroform flooded her senses. The dark street spun violently, Dominic's obsessive stare being the last thing she saw before the world faded to black. Harper woke to the smell of lavender and old wood. She didn't open her eyes immediately, relying on her other senses to gauge her surroundings. She wasn't on the freezing concrete. She was lying on a mattress so soft it felt like a cloud, wrapped in high thread-count sheets. The air was warm. She snapped her eyes open and sat up, her heart kicking into overdrive. She was in a bedroom straight out of a European palace. Heavy velvet curtains blocked out the sunlight. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the frescoed ceiling. She looked down at herself. Her dirty street clothes were gone, replaced by a vintage, pearl-white silk nightgown. Panic seized her. She threw off the covers and bolted for the heavy oak door. It was locked. "Hey!" she screamed, pounding her fists against the wood. "Let me out of here! Help!" The door clicked and swung inward. Harper stumbled back. A tall, lean man with silver hair at his temples and piercing blue eyes stepped into the room. He wore a perfectly tailored three-piece suit. He looked at her with a mixture of pity and severe calculation. "Screaming won't help you, Miss Hayes," he said, his voice smooth and cultured. "We are on the north shore of Long Island, the Moretti estate. Your nearest neighbor is 2 miles away, and there are 30 armed men patrolling the grounds." Harper swallowed hard, her mind racing. "How do you know my name?" "We are thorough," the man replied. "I am Silas. I am Dominic's consigliere, his advisor. I strongly suggest you calm down. Dominic wishes to see you for dinner." "I want my clothes," Harper spat, crossing her arms defensively over the thin silk of the nightgown. "I want my jacket, and I want to leave. You can't just kidnap people." Silas offered a thin, humorless smile. "In this world, Dominic does exactly as he pleases. Your clothes were burned. They were a biohazard. New garments have been provided in the closet. Dinner is at 8. Do not keep him waiting." Silas stepped out, and the door locked shut behind him. Harper tore into the walk-in closet. It was filled with clothes, but not just any clothes. They were all vintage, exquisite, and entirely not her style. Emerald green silk dresses, cashmere sweaters, tailored slacks. They were all her size. They were the clothes of a wealthy, sophisticated woman. She found a simple black dress, threw it on, and waited. At exactly 8 o'clock, the door was unlocked by a silent guard, who escorted her down a grand, sweeping marble staircase. The estate was a fortress of silent luxury. Original oil paintings lined the walls. She was led into a massive dining room. Dominic Moretti sat at the head of a long mahogany table. He was dressed flawlessly in a black button-down shirt. The moment Harper walked in, he stood up. His eyes dragged over her, a haunting, desperate look in them. "Sit," he commanded softly. Harper sat at the opposite end of the table, 10 feet away from him. A maid silently poured wine and served plates of roasted duck, but Harper didn't touch her cutlery. "Why am I here?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to keep it steady. Dominic took a slow sip of his wine. 3 years ago, my wife, Katerina, was killed in a car bomb meant for me. The Lucchese family orchestrated it. I burned their empire to the ground in retaliation. But it didn't bring her back. He set his glass down and stared directly into Harper's eyes. Then, last night, I step out of a restaurant and she is standing in front of me. You have her eyes, her hair, her exact bone structure. The resemblance is terrifying. "I am not your dead wife," Harper said fiercely, leaning forward. "I'm a girl from the streets of Queens. My mother died of an overdose when I was 10. I have no family. I am just a coincidence." "Coincidences do not exist in my world," Dominic replied coldly. "You will stay here. You will be safe. No one will ever harm you. You will want for nothing." "You mean I'm your pet?" Harper shot back. "A doll you can dress up to pretend your wife isn't rotting in the ground." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Dominic's jaw clenched, a dangerous muscle ticking in his cheek. He stood up slowly, walked the length of the table and leaned down until his face was inches from hers. Harper held her breath, refusing to flinch. "You have her face," Dominic whispered, his breath warm against her skin. "But you do not have her manners. Katerina was gentle. You have the teeth of a stray dog. Do not bite the hand that feeds you, Harper, or you will find out exactly why they call me a monster." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her untouched food. For the next 2 weeks, Harper lived in a gilded cage. She was allowed to roam the massive mansion, always trailed by silent guards. Dominic observed her from afar. He would sit in his study, drinking scotch, just watching her read in the library. It was psychological torture. She felt her own identity slipping away, being overwritten by the ghost of Katerina Moretti. But Harper was a survivor, and survivors are curious. One rainy Tuesday, while Dominic was in the city handling business, Harper noticed a heavy oak door at the end of the East Wing corridor. It was the only door in the house with a modern, heavy-duty deadbolt. She waited until her guard, Victor, stepped out to the terrace for a cigarette. Pulling a bobby pin from her hair, a trick she'd learned from a street grifter named Old Man Mickey, she went to work on the lock. It took her 4 agonizing minutes, her hands sweating. But finally, the tumbler clicked. She slipped inside and closed the door behind her. It was Katerina's private study, left completely untouched since her death. Dust covered the antique writing desk. The air was stale. Harper moved quickly, pulling open drawers. If she was going to be held captive because of this woman, she wanted to know who she was. In the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a false bottom, Harper found a small, leather-bound journal. She opened it to the last entry, dated just 3 days before the car bomb that supposedly killed Katerina. Harper's blood ran cold as she read the elegant handwriting. Dominic suspects nothing. The explosives are secured. Silas has arranged the transfer of the funds to the Swiss accounts. I have played the obedient, terrified Mafia wife for 5 years. But tomorrow, it ends. Dominic will burn in that car, and I will finally be free to return to my real family. I just pray my sister, the one my mother was forced to abandon in Queens, is still alive. Her name is Harper. The journal slipped from Harper's trembling fingers and hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. Katerina hadn't been the victim of a hit. Katerina had orchestrated the hit against Dominic, and they were sisters. Suddenly, the heavy oak door creaked open behind her. "I told you!" Silas's cold voice echoed in the dusty room, accompanied by the metallic click of a revolver hammer being pulled back. "Coincidences do not exist in our world." Silas stepped fully into the dusty, stale light of the study, the silver cylinder of his Smith & Wesson Model 60 gleaming menacingly. He didn't look like a sophisticated advisor anymore. The mask of polished etiquette had completely melted away, leaving only the cold, dead eyes of a cartel executioner. "Step away from the desk, Harper," Silas ordered, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it echoed like a thunderclap in the silent room. Harper's back hit the heavy mahogany of Katerina's desk. Her fingers instinctively gripped the edge of the wood until her knuckles turned white. "You knew," she breathed, her mind connecting the terrifying dots. "You knew who I was the second I stepped out of that alley." "Of course I knew," Silas sneered, keeping the barrel pointed squarely at her chest. "Katerina spent a fortune hiring Beau Dietel and Associates, the best private investigators in Manhattan, to track you down. She wanted to ease her guilty conscience, leaving her little sister to rot in the foster system while she married into a billion-dollar syndicate weighed heavily on her. She planned to leave you a multi-million-dollar trust fund at Credit Suisse before she vanished." Harper felt physically sick. The sister she had never known, the sister who had supposedly died violently, was a traitor to her own husband. She was going to kill Dominic. "She was going to try," Silas corrected, a dark, venomous laugh escaping his lips. Katerina was a beautiful viper, but she was spectacularly naive. She thought she could wire $50 million to a UBS-numbered account in Geneva, blow her husband to pieces on Fifth Avenue, and walk away clean. But she needed my security clearances to bypass the Commission's oversight. "So you helped her," Harper said, stalling for time, her eyes darting toward the heavy brass letter opener sitting on the blotter beside her. "I enabled her, and then I neutralized her," Silas said coldly. "I swapped the C4 detonators under her Mercedes. When she turned the ignition, expecting to arm the bomb, meant for Dominic's SUV. She incinerated herself instead. It was poetic, really. I framed the Lucchese family for the hit. Dominic wiped out our biggest rivals in a blind rage, and I took control of the Geneva accounts. It was a flawless ascension. Until I bumped into Dominic on Mulberry Street," Harper whispered. "Precisely," Silas sighed, stepping closer, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You are an agonizingly loud echo of a past I buried. Dominic's obsession with you threatens to destabilize the entire syndicate. I cannot have him distracted, and I certainly cannot have him reading that journal. I'll tell him you tried to escape and attacked a guard, a tragic end for a street girl." Harper's hand closed around the brass letter opener. She prepared to throw it, to fight like the feral survivor she was, when a voice, colder than the New York winter, froze the air in the room. "Is that right, Silas?" Both Silas and Harper snapped their heads toward the doorway. Dominic stood there, completely immersed in the shadows of the corridor. He held his matte black Sig Sauer P226 at his side. He hadn't gone into the city for business. He had been in the house all along. Silas's face drained of color, turning a sickly, ashen gray. The gun in his hand trembled. "Dominic, boss, listen to me. This girl, she broke in here. She was trying to steal. I heard everything, Dominic interrupted. His voice lacked its usual thunder. Instead, it was a hollow, dead sound that was infinitely more terrifying. He stepped into the light. His eyes were not fixed on Silas, but on the small leather journal lying on the floor near Harper's feet. Dominic, she manipulated me, Silas pleaded, taking a desperate step backward, lowering his weapon slightly. Katerina was a traitor. I protected you. I protected the family. You let me mourn a woman who wanted me dead, Dominic said softly, his gaze finally lifting to meet his consigliere's eyes. You let me burn half of Brooklyn to the ground for a lie. You let me bleed for a ghost. Boss, please! Dominic didn't let him finish. In one fluid, blindingly fast motion, he raised the Sig Sauer and fired a single hollow-point round. The deafening crack echoed through the massive estate. Silas's chest caved backward, the impact throwing him violently against the bookshelves. He slid to the floor, his designer suit ruined, dead before his head hit the Persian rug. Silence descended on the room, heavy and suffocating, thick with the sharp, metallic smell of cordite and blood. Dominic stood frozen, his gun arm slowly lowering. The invincible king of the New York underworld looked entirely broken. He walked forward on numb legs, stepping over Silas's body, and knelt beside Harper. He picked up the leather journal. Harper watched him, her own heart hammering, as he read the final entry in his dead wife's handwriting. She saw the exact moment his world fractured, the illusion of his perfect marriage, the foundation of his grief, shattered into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces. He dropped the book, his shoulders slumping. He buried his face in his hands, a jagged, agonizing breath tearing through his chest. Harper didn't run. The door was open. The guard was dead. She could have fled down the stairs and disappeared into the sprawling Long Island estate. Instead, the street-hardened survivor looked at the broken mob boss and saw something she recognized intimately. Profound, isolating betrayal. She knelt beside him, placing a hesitant hand on his shoulder. "Dominic," she whispered, using his first name for the first time. He looked up at her. He didn't see Katerina anymore. He saw Harper. He saw the dirt, the grit, the honesty that his wife had never possessed. "We need to go," Harper told him, her voice finding its steel. If Silas was stealing millions, he wasn't doing it alone. You have a war coming. The war didn't start with bullets. It started with data. For a week, the Long Island estate became a war room. Harper didn't return to her gilded cage. She sat at the head of the mahogany table alongside Dominic. Her street smarts and ruthless pragmatism proved invaluable. She understood desperation and greed better than any of Dominic's Ivy League-educated lawyers. Dominic's lead forensic accountant, a nervous prodigy named Wyatt, ran Silas's encrypted drives through Palantir data analytics software. At 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, Wyatt burst into the dining room. "Boss," Wyatt stammered, sliding a laptop across the polished wood. The UBS account in Geneva. Silas didn't drain it. He didn't have the final biometric authorization. Dominic frowned, leaning over the screen. "Then who withdrew the 50 million yesterday?" "The authorization came from a dummy corporation," Wyatt explained, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Aegis Holdings, but the IP address for the transfer bounced through Deutsche Bank and landed on a secure Wi-Fi network in Florida, specifically a luxury penthouse in the Porsche Design Tower in Sunny Isles Beach, Miami." Harper felt a cold chill run down her spine. "Silas said he swapped the detonators. He said he killed Katerina." Dominic's jaw set into a granite line. Silas was a liar to the end. He didn't kill her. He helped her fake her death. They put a decoy in that car. Some poor Lucchese girl who fit the profile. Katerina has been hiding in Miami for 3 years, waiting for the heat to die down so she could steal the money. 24 hours later, Dominic's private Gulfstream, G650, touched down on the tarmac at Miami Opa-locka Executive Airport. The sweltering Florida heat was a stark contrast to the freezing New York sleet where this nightmare had begun. Harper stood beside Dominic in the back of a blacked-out Escalade, checking the magazine of a compact Glock 19 Dominic had handed her. She wasn't wearing vintage silk anymore. She wore dark, tactical denim, a black leather jacket, and her hair was tied back tight. She looked like a queen stepping onto a battlefield. They bypassed the front desk of the towering, cylindrical glass skyscraper in Sunny Isles. Using cloned keycards Wyatt had procured from the dark web, Dominic, Harper, and Victor stepped into the Deservata, the building's famous glass elevator, designed to carry billionaires and their supercars directly to their penthouses. The elevator shot upward to the 50th floor. The doors slid open with a soft ping, revealing a sprawling, ultra-modern penthouse with panoramic views of the Atlantic Ocean. Sitting on a white leather sofa, sipping Dom Perignon and looking out at the turquoise water, was a ghost. Caterina Moretti turned around. The physical resemblance was staggering. It was like looking into a funhouse mirror. Caterina had the same auburn hair, the same striking green eyes, the same sharp jawline. But where Harper's face was etched with survival and grit, Caterina's was smoothed by Botox, wealth, and absolute narcissism. Caterina froze, her champagne flute slipping from her manicured fingers and shattering on the Italian marble floor. She stared at Dominic, then her eyes shifted to Harper, widening in absolute horror. "Hello, wife," Dominic said, his voice dropping the temperature in the sun-drenched room to absolute 0. 2 massive men in linen suits, Russian muscle Caterina had clearly hired with the stolen funds, stepped out from the kitchen, drawing machine pistols. Dominic and Victor didn't even blink. They moved with lethal synchronicity. 2 silenced shots echoed with soft thwips. Both bodyguards dropped to the floor, bleeding out on the pristine white rugs. Caterina scrambled backward, backing up against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. "Dominic, wait! Silas forced me. He threatened my life." "Silas is dead," Dominic said, walking slowly across the room, his gun leveled at her chest. "He told me everything before I put a bullet in his heart. You sold me to the Lucchese family. You tried to burn me alive." "I did it for us!" Caterina screamed, tears streaking her flawless makeup. She looked at Harper, her eyes blazing with sudden, venomous hatred. You filthy little street rat! How did you get into my life?" "I was surviving." Harper stepped forward, refusing to be intimidated by the woman who shared her blood. "While you were drinking champagne and leaving me to rot with our junkie mother in Queens." Caterina laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Mother was a lost cause. I saved myself. I crawled out of the gutter and took what was mine. You're just a cheap copy of me, playing dress-up in my husband's house." "She's twice the woman you ever pretended to be," Dominic interrupted, his voice laced with venom. He looked at Caterina, really looked at her, and saw nothing but a stranger. The ghost he had mourned vanished into the Miami air. "She possesses loyalty. You only possess greed." Caterina's face contorted into an ugly snarl. With lightning speed, she reached behind the drape of the curtains and pulled a gold-plated derringer she had hidden on the windowsill. She didn't aim at Dominic. She aimed directly at Harper's face. "I'm the only queen!" Caterina shrieked, pulling the trigger. But Harper was faster. The streets had taught her to anticipate violence before it sparked. She dropped to a knee, raising the Glock 19, and fired twice. The crack of the 9mm rounds was deafening. Katerina was thrown backward against the reinforced glass. The derringer fired wildly into the ceiling. She slid slowly down the window, leaving a thick smear of crimson against the bright blue backdrop of the Atlantic sky. Harper stayed on one knee, her chest heaving, the gun smoking in her hand. She stared at the lifeless body of the sister she had never known, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, hollow sense of closure. Dominic walked over and gently took the gun from her trembling fingers. He offered her his hand. Harper looked up at him. The man who had kidnapped her off the street a month ago was gone. In his place was a partner, a king who had finally found an equal to share his violent, chaotic throne. She took his hand and stood up. "It's over," Dominic whispered, pulling her close. "No," Harper corrected him, looking out over the sprawling city of Miami, her green eyes hardening with a new, dark ambition. "The old empire is over. Ours is just beginning." Did Harper make the right choice in pulling the trigger, or did the Mafia world completely corrupt her soul? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this intense, twist-filled true romance drama, make sure to hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, dark, and romantic underworld stories every single week.